sense of soul.
Hey Soul Seekers, it's Shanna. Journey with me to discover how people around the world awaken to their true sense of soul. Now go grab your coffee and open your mind, heart, and soul.
It's time to awaken.
Today on Sense of Soul, I have Rebecca Dawson. She's an international consultant, speaker, and author who has been channeling since a spontaneous event at the age of 18. With over 25 years of delivering wisdom and teachings from multiple aspects of Source, such as Saint Germain and the Masters, she delivers current leading edge information about humanity's paradigm shift to the multidimensional experience, the mechanics of reality, and the human blueprint. Rebecca has facilitated over 2,000 channeled sessions and has conducted dozens of workshops, seminars, and retreats all over the world. She has an amazing YouTube channel, and you can find all of her information at RebeccaDawson.com. And she's with us today to share some of this wisdom. So please welcome Rebecca.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Ooh, I love your background.
Oh, thanks.
That's pretty.
That's what I thought. Wow, the masters are always talking about the blooming of consciousness. So here we go.
So pretty. Yeah. And the many layers of our soul, right?
Right.
The last time you and I talked, it was like our souls took over.
I
And
know. That was so fun.
in fact, I was very affected for days and I felt an immediate connection with you. And if I remember correctly, I even got emotional.
I did too. I did too.
Because
It was
just
quite a beautiful remembrance connecting
yeah,
again. Yeah.
I love that. I love that you said that. And so I'm glad we're connecting again today and just learn more about who you are and how you came to be.
So the backstory. Well, it's interesting because I loved our previous conversation because it was just us being in our fullest in the moment. And so, that's who we are. We always tend to look into our past and our experiences to define who we are, and it really does. They're just things that we move through and visit along the way to where we are now. So where shall I start? I was don't think you want my whole life story, but I'm from Perth in Australia. And I've recently moved to the US. I've been coming and going here for some years now. And I've always had an open memory for other experiences and other lives. I never lost that when I was young. And I had, I guess, what you would call psychic abilities. I could see colors and different entities and all sorts of things. I had some super interesting, didn't feel interesting at the time. They felt quite disturbing at the time. I guess what people would call more intergalactic experiences when I was a child. It's not something I talk about very much, but I feel like I can now. But were quite confusing. And it really felt like I was living in at least two different worlds a lot of the time. So that was interesting. I was fortunate that my mother was pretty switched on. She was interested in spiritual inquiry and esoterics, and she got me into a meditation group quite young, when I was about 9. So it at least gave me the ability to feel confident in what was happening and feel as if I had some sort of autonomy and I could direct things a little bit more and be less afraid. So that was helpful. But of course, this is back in the 80s and 90s, and it wasn't something that you could openly speak about. So I did find that quite difficult growing up. I went to a Catholic school, and these are not things to be spoken about.
Yeah. I understand that whole like in between, like you have one foot over here and one in the other. And I think that oftentimes children are like that naturally. And so for someone like your mother to have fed that part of you so that you could grow in that is beautiful, because a lot of times we're shut down.
Right.
That's in your imagination. Get out of your head, all those things.
Right. I was very blessed there. I guess it was part of the design, the blueprint for this life. And I don't think she really understood very much about what I was experiencing. Well, why would you? But at least it wasn't dismissed.
She did her part.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of that sometimes too, like the other day, I was led to order this Merkaba. But since I've had this on, I have actually felt very protected and my energy feels restored.
It's like you're remembering the more appropriate or baseline configuration for your vibration. It's
Yeah.
reminding you of that. Yeah,
Right. And
beautiful.
you wonder how often we do those things, because they're in our blueprint. We do them. We don't know why, but they work.
Yeah, yeah. They're great reference points, I feel.
Yeah.
I always like to say, when I was much younger, I used to work in a really big crystal shop, and people would come in and they would say, oh, which crystal do I need for this? This is what's
Yeah.
happening for me now. And, we had to have a really broad knowledge of all these different stones and practices. And it was interesting because people used to come in and I used to feel this overwhelming desire to say to them, nothing is more powerful than you. If this stone helps to remind you of that capacity within yourself, for example, if they're, heartbroken or something and they come in and they want some rose quartz or chrysocolla or something like that, it's to remind you that you have that capacity within yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Because, everything outside of us is really just an extension of who we are. And when we see something externally that resonates with us, it's because that part of us is switching on. It's
Yeah.
nothing more powerful than our own consciousness.
Oh, isn't that fun I mean, I had a little boutique. It was like a little metaphysical boutique. And we sold gemstones and drums and, books and all these fun things. It was so cool. It had the coolest vibe ever. When we would go and shop for the stones, we'd go in here in Colorado, we have a lot of those places. And there's like this, like, how they have like furniture row? They have like gemstone row.
Oh, wow.
And I'd walk in and it was like there's so much energy. Back then I was like, I didn't even know what to do with this. I just had to leave. Right. And I think that's kind of what I've been experiencing with the solar flares. Like sometimes we get to these experiences where we feel they're overwhelming. And I've explained this to my children too. Sometimes we need to change how we think about it. So instead of, saying I have so much anxiety, we say now we have energy on our chest. And it just shifts it because that's all it is. But, what was your first experience feeling like there is something coming through me and it is powerful? And how do I balance this?
Mm-hmm.
How do I feel safe in my vehicle?
Mm-hmm. I love that. That's such a great question because there were often times where I didn't feel safe. So when I was around 14 or 15, it's interesting because I hear a lot of other people who have what they call the psychic awakening, and it tends to happen around puberty time. And I have heard explanations from people say that it's because there's so much energy flowing through your body and things are waking up.
True.
So around, 14, 15, I started to have these dreams that weren't dreams that would happen just as I was about to go to sleep. And there was always these three beings. They felt like men to me in white cloaks with white hoods that would stand on the side of my bed. And they would just stand there and it felt okay to me.
Hmm.
And I would say, oh, they're here again. And when they did that, I would lie in my bed, something I never really speak about. So this is interesting. And my arms would start to lift off the bed and move around and make certain patterns. And I would feel such a surge of energy moving through my whole nervous system. And then it would just rest again. And then they would disappear. And that was it. I would go to sleep. And this happened for on and off for about a year or two.
Mhm.
And then I didn't hear from them again. And then a couple of years later, I had my first channeling experience, which was a total accident. I mean, that wasn't planned and that was just came out of nowhere. I was playing with some tarot cards and I was just mucking around with them. And all of a sudden, my energy expanded and my voice changed. And I felt like the Marshmallow Man from Ghostbusters. And there it was. It was there and it lasted for about an hour and it felt like about 10 minutes. But what was interesting was that while this was happening, the same arm movements that used to happen just as I was going to sleep happened the first time I did that channeling experience happened, which was spontaneous. So in reflection, I can see that somehow I was being energetically or vibrationally prepared to have the capacity to do that.
That's so interesting. So, but it was shut down for a while. Obviously, the ego is moving in at that point too. So, and the ego is so strong at that age. So, do you think it kind of took over? And then when there was another kind of door available?
It was probably a couple of years, but that's when all of the other funky stuff started to happen that, didn't feel so great. Interesting experiences happened. And I wasn't sure if they were real or not in the night. And I would wake up outside the house and have to get back in and that kind of thing. So that happened in a couple of years there. And then the spontaneous channeling happened. And then, yeah. So I haven't quite reconciled that within myself yet as to why that period of interesting experiences happened. But I trust everything happens in perfection.
Right. So you had to learn how to trust yourself then, obviously. That discernment was probably something very important, which I didn't learn until like my late 30s. So
right. Well, that's really when it got interesting, because a lot of people have come to me over the years and say, I really want to learn how to channel or how to be more open or to really be in touch with my higher self or however they want to describe that. And I always say to them, it's not getting there that's the difficult part. It's what to do after that happens. Mm-hmm. Because for me, that completely redefined my life. And because it was all these events were sort of spontaneous and they weren't something I consciously asked for or attempted to move into an experience of, the challenge for me was, what do I do with this now? How do I know that it's okay? When do I know that it's okay? How do I direct it? How do I control when it happens and when it doesn't happen? Because in the beginning, it was just happening all over the place. It was like a fire hose. And that was really, really disruptive. And it was inconvenient. Because if you can imagine, like in Australia, 18 is the age when you can start going to pubs.
Well, in Louisiana, it was too when I was 18.
Okay, cool. Because I know mostly it's a little bit different here in the US.
Yeah, totally.
But I was first year university, and I was really wanted to go out and have a good time.
Right.
I found freedom for the first time, and that was really disruptive, because what I found was that I would be out and about, and in a big crowd and having lots of fun, and then all of a sudden, boom, it would happen, and it would happen because someone happened to brush past me. And there was a message for them or something had invoked in that moment. And it wasn't great. So the difficulty after becoming a channeler is now, how do we move into a state where we're an active conscious participant with it? Because the last thing I wanted to be was a trance channel where you're not conscious and you're not aware.
No boundaries.
Exactly. So how do you actually now integrate with that, or how do you allow it to integrate with you? And that was really the journey after that.
That's how I felt about the sun energy even.
Right.
I felt like it was controlling me and I had no say. And then I said, wait a minute, I am. And so I can control this. I have a choice. I can control my environment and what I'm experiencing. I had to move into that.
Of course, because every experience you have in reality and how you experience reality is entirely based upon your viewing position. And so I spent the next, say, 10 years after that really investigating, exploring, practicing what is my viewing position. In other words, what do I really believe? How does all of this really work?
Right.
Do I see this as something separate to myself? Because as long as I see it as something separate, you're never really in full sovereignty with it. And a lot of people might say, well, of course you're in sovereignty if you're choosing it. But there's a different, I don't like to use the word level. There's a different experience of sovereignty when you really drop into the realization that everything is one consciousness. And then whatever comes through, you're a branch on a cosmic tree, and it's just another part of the tree that's starting to express through you. So moving into an awareness of unity consciousness in my 20s is what really allowed me to be in the position that I am now, to be able to do what I do. I think I'd be a little bit crazy otherwise.
Yeah. It's like surrendering to it in the same. So there's that polarity.
Well, even surrender for many people is like giving up your power. I know it's not in a spiritual sense. It's relaxing into the greatness of the one.
Right.
But there's something more than that that can be explored, which is I am the greatness of the one.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we really begin to show up in reality. And I think do some amazing things.
You know, I wanted to ask you, you said you grew up Catholic, or you went to a Catholic school. I have this theory that, you know, many of the beings that I've encountered are actually based or rooted from my belief systems for generations prior. So I noticed that, you know, I don't connect so much with like a little green man. It's more to be an angel because this is kind of what is in my DNA. And one of the people that you channel, you know, is Saint Germain.
He calls himself Germain. Sometimes he calls himself other names, depending on which aspect of expression he wants to express from for the purpose of that conversation. But he actually doesn't like, as far as I sense, it doesn't like the whole saint.
Really? Okay.
Well, as it's been expressed to me, that's something that's been assigned, but not something that he would necessarily choose to assign.
Okay, so it's kind of like, please don't call me Miss. Right?
Well, it's just like,
Call me
okay,
Shanna.
if that's what you want to call me, but I don't,
Right.
take too much ownership of that.
So there's many aspects, like you said, many aspects of him, but he's still kind of an archetype. Even all of the different aspects, he has these characteristics about himself. Can you tell
Yes.
us about Jermaine?
From my awareness of what I
Yes, from your
have when I
awareness.
express, and some of this comes from my own memory of my experiences with that consciousness in those lives. So there is both equally a great sense of compassion and a love of humanity, that is coupled with a real sense of boldness and audacity, whereby that consciousness loves to challenge people to be as grandiose and as bold and as not ostentatious, he doesn't like that word, but as on display as possible with the grandiosity of your consciousness. And I love that. And that challenged my personality in the beginning because I sort of grew up with a belief system, Catholic, I suppose, that the more aware you become, the quieter you get about it. And the more you step out of the limelight and you do everything behind the scenes. And that can be true to a certain extent, but he really loves to encourage people to put it on display because that's what the planet needs at this time. And he's certainly had incarnations or life experiences where he's been very visible in his ability to display the grandiosity of consciousness. And he's done that to challenge people, particularly during certain centuries where the spiritual are the pious, and it's not good to show that you have an awful lot of wealth if you're a spiritual person necessarily, or, that you can have all the things that you want to have if you're spiritually aware. So he does like to challenge the status quo there a little bit.
It's like as you speak about him, he starts to come through you.
Yes, because there's not really a lot of separation anymore. And that was something I used to have a lot of confusion with when I was a lot younger, because as I mentioned earlier, I had a lot of past life memories. And then as I got older and people started to send me things about this character known as Saint Germain, because I've always been very careful not to read too much, learn too much. I don't want to influence what comes through. I like to be completely open. And people were sending me these accounts and stories, and I was getting confused because I'm like, but they're my memories. So there is a blending there to a certain extent.
Yeah, Bashar, Daryl Inca had come on and spoke of Bashar, very similar. it's hard for him to, really describe exactly that relationship,
Right.
but that they are one.
Right.
Yeah, it's very interesting. And so as you went back to speak about yourself, I saw this shift in your energy,
Yes.
and
Yes.
he went back.
It's always with me because I guess, like the cosmic tree, this Rebecca appearance is one branch of that tree of consciousness. And
Mm-hmm.
so, really, moving into a channeling state or accessing any of that information or wisdom, it's really just leaning back into the greatness of the tree, and then it's available. It's
Wow.
not such a big shift, and we
Yeah.
all have this capacity.
I was just about to say that a few days, I think it was last week, and I regretfully can't remember who I was talking to, but he was telling me a story about how this happened to him and it kind of just shifted. And the way he was describing it, I was like, God, I was like, I've experienced that before. Like when I start talking about my ancestors,
Mm-hmm.
like something comes over me and it just floods out of my mouth. And there's this passion and this strong desire to get my voice heard. Then if I was to stop talking about it, I would be shifting back into kind of what I'm talking like right now. But even for a
Mm-hmm.
second, I felt it rise within me, just telling you that.
Yeah. It's just amazing, isn't it? And if you think about that, linear time is just how we perceive life. And
Mm-hmm.
perhaps there's one expression of consciousness, and what we call our genetic history or our genetic future are just different expressions of that one consciousness. Then perhaps your ancestors and you, there's one ancestor I'm thinking of in particular at this moment, Marie
Yeah.
Laveau,
Yeah.
that you're Marie Laveau expressing in a different moment in time and space. Or
Right.
she is a different expression of you in a different moment of time and
You
space.
explained that very well because that can be very hard to wrap your head around. It took me years to understand that. I'm like, what are they talking about? There's no time.
Right.
I experienced having no time all day.
Right. And we
I
used to
don't have
think
time
that
for
was a
this.
problem, and now it's wonderful.
Well, it is kind of strange when we're in this space, it's funky too, you know what
Yeah.
I mean? And then I leave and I shift and I'm in another space and it's true. There's no space either.
Mm-hmm.
There's no one solid space. And I think that that's kind of like what most people are talking about right now, moving out of that 3D space and into these higher dimensions.
Right. Well, we expand beyond the 3D so we can start to see what's actually there. What's actually there. Because, time, just like the moon kind of encapsulates the experience for humanity, in many regards, we are in a sensory simulation of encapsulated space and time. And as our vibration increases, we begin to expand our view beyond that. So we still experience third dimensionality, but now we can experience beyond it too. So this new earth shift is not about destroying the old and going to the new. It's about expanding out so you can still encapsulate
Right.
the
So you can be
old.
the witness of it.
Yes. And now you are sitting with a greater macroscopic viewpoint. So we're still aware of it. We just have the choice as to whether or not we want to exist in any particular moment within the limitations of it.
And I think people can relate to when you start to be present in the world, the tree that you never ever noticed
Right.
becomes magnificent. And you notice that it's got all kinds of magical little eyes all over it or whatever you see.
Yes.
Yeah,
You begin to recognize it as a living
right. But
representation.
that's the example of moving beyond that 3D. It's still there, but in you for 40 years, maybe you never noticed it. And now all of a
Yes.
sudden, you notice the birds that are in it.
Remember those magic eye pictures from back in the day? And
Yeah.
you would just stare at them and stare at them, and all of a
Oh yeah.
sudden, for me, that's how I experience seeing source consciousness now come to life.
Mm-hmm.
And I love the example you just brought, Shanna, about the tree, because we find it so much easier to see the source energy in natural landscapes and natural environments, like a tree. Oh, look at this tree, it's perfect. I can see the life come out of it. I can feel it. It's just as it needs to be. Germain often challenges us, this is something he says often, to say we can look at the tree in perfection and we can see the source consciousness in it, because we don't feel that there's anything we need to change about the tree. The tree is as it is. We respect it as a representative of source consciousness. But our great challenge at this time for the earth reality is to have the same approach to the landscape of humanity. Because how difficult is it for us to look at another human and see it as life in action, and to really fall in love with the perfection of humanity, because we have such a belief that humanity is flawed.
That's kind of funny that you said that, because my tree in the front yard is this very gnarled tree. Okay. And it has all these twists and turns and branches that don't make sense at all. And anyone would look at it and want to trim it and mold it and do all these things to it. And I'm like, leave it alone. It is so amazing. There is no tree on this street like this tree. And I love its uniqueness.
That is so beautiful. And I wish for us to be able to do that with all humans also. But I love, that's such a great demonstration. Thank you.
Yeah, actually, my lawn people just said, well, can we at least trim some of the leaves off, because we can't get under some. I'm like, fine, just a little haircut. It won't
Just a haircut.
hurt anybody. But it's interesting, because I've taken so many pictures of this tree, and like in any storm, when there's a lot of wind, it dances, and you can see, because it's all in different directions. I mean, it is a performance. But I would have never noticed these things ever if I wasn't able to move out of just the everyday robotic kind of get up, go to work, do your thing, busy, busy, busy. I would have never been able to have this relationship that I feel like I have with the tree.
With the tree. That's so beautiful. I remember I met Dolores Cannon once. Some years ago, before she passed away. Yeah, she came to Perth.
Wow.
And I had read her books like many years ago. I think it was Conversations with Nostradamus. Before I even started channeling, I read them when I was in my early teens. I remember her saying she's never seen so many trees that are so evidently vortexes as she did when she was in Perth in Western Australia, because the land there is so ancient. And so after she said that, I started looking for trees that had like kind of twisted trunks. And we have these really ancient forests down in the southwest of Western Australia, and these giant trees called red tingle trees. And, you have your sequoia redwoods here. So they're kind of similar to that, but a little bit different. But the bases of them are so huge that you can walk into them and stand inside the trunks of these trees. They started logging them. They even had ones that you could park cars inside. They were so big, like giant trees. And I went down to these forests and went into these trees and stood inside. And it's interesting, because your whole body starts to do this. You have to like kind of find your balance, and then you start swirling if you anchor your feet into the ground. It's amazing. So I didn't know until then that trees were great demonstrations of the vortices.
And such great teachers, such great teachers. Yes. The deeper you're rooted, the stronger your trunk is, and the more that you go with the storm and move with it.
Right.
And, you're okay. You don't resist it. You just do. And it's so wise to know that when its branches are too heavy, it just lets go.
Our etheric nervous systems look very much like the nervous systems of trees. They're not so different. I started mapping it maybe like 12 or 14 years ago, but actually it comes out and extends beyond the physical body. So this is the nervous system that we really begin to, to connect into all things with, and it looks very similar to a tree's. So I think we're not so different in design.
Not at all. And that's what I'm finding when I, have been experiencing like the sun energy.
When it comes to the sun, we know that we are stellar in nature. So we know that we're made up physiologically of the same substance as stars or as the sun. And so within this solar system ecosystem, our human forms, in many regards, are birthed from the sun. Our reality is birthed from the sun. And so because of that, and because our consciousness is beginning to expand at this time, we're now moving more in resonance with what the sun is doing. So when the sun is expressing and releasing, we are also expressing and releasing. So when you're having what you call a reaction to a solar flare, let us say that you are now moving and acting in accordance with the solar flare. So something is being expressed. And as humans, we don't really like to eject energy. Not really. We like to eject energy if we feel that we're in control of it or it's got a purpose or going in a particular direction. We don't like to just eject energy because something is building up and needs to be released, because we have all sorts of judgments and stories around that. But the anxiety that a lot of people have been feeling with these solar flares is actually the resistance to that which is naturally being released within your vibrational environment, because we are all stellar beings.
Yeah.
So of course we also are behaving in the same way that the sun is, and in accordance with the sun.
That helps me a lot, and I hope it helps listeners if they're experiencing anything. And also, I have to tell you, it's so funny. I've been studying Sophia, and Sophia's kind of my girl. And a few days ago, right around the same day as we had a CME release a few days ago, it's just hitting the earth. But I have this little plaque of Saint Sophia, which she really was never a saint, but there's this little art piece of Sophia, and it has faith, hope, and love, which are her children. That was, yeah. And it fell off the bookshelf, and I was across the room. I pick it up, I put it back, and then I'm walking away, and I'm like, in the Pistis Sophia myth, it is that Sophia birthed the sun. And all of a sudden, it was just another thing that helped me shift into the mind frame of, like you said, for a while there, I was like, why is the sun trying to kill us?
Well, there's a reason that, the sun has been revered in so many cultures in the planet's history. It's not because it has power over, it's because it's also the innate power within ourselves, and we are birthed from the sun. So whatever the sun is doing, we are doing. So of course we need both.
That oneness, it's another one of those examples of oneness. These are all things that can happen when you are in that awareness.
Yes, it's like being aware enough to notice that life creates in resonance with you. And those are the moments where you realize the resonance is there.
That Schumann resonance actually today almost proves that we are experiencing the same frequency as Mother Earth.
Right.
And during an alignment of that, you have the opportunity to transmute communication when you're aligned.
Yes.
That explains channeling in many ways.
Yes, absolutely. And even in what you've just said about, the earth, humanity is an extension of the earth's consciousness. We're not separate to it. We're like leaves on the tree of the earth's consciousness, and we grow and fall and drop and keep going, but we're not really separate to it.
No.
So in this regard, the masters have been very clear that humans can't actually destroy the earth, because the leaves can't destroy the tree if you're part of the same consciousness.
There is a beautiful poem that Thich Nhat Hanh had wrote, where he talks about like the new leaf and the dead leaf are still one. It was so beautiful how he said it. I
Oh,
could
I
never
haven't read that one. I'll have to try and find
Oh,
it.
I think it's called Oneness is the poem. But yeah, I mean, I feel like, and maybe I'm totally off. So listeners, I apologize if I am, but I feel that you have a way, and I hope that I do too, that this is receivable to people. You know what I mean? I feel like how you teach, I fully receive it. I don't have to get on my phone and say, what does that word mean she just said? Or what are they talking about? And that I feel like this is a time where we have people who are curious, and you have people who, like in the Gnostic Gospels, right? They have the eyes that can see and the ears that can hear, right? They have a hunger for knowledge and wisdom and understanding. And so I hope to be a space and have guests like you where my listeners can receive and understand this. Because there's lots of places I can go and I'm like, what the F are they talking about? What? Wow, that's so far out there.
Well, I'm sure I get that response from a lot of people as
I
well
don't
with
know.
what I do. But I think, Shanna, more importantly, our minds can try to understand, and we can seek knowledge so that we can feel more comfortable and more empowered. But really, the mind can never really truly understand the grandiose
True.
nature of consciousness. For me, what's more
Yeah.
important, and why I love speaking to you and our last conversation too, is that people come to find a resonant feeling. And even if we're speaking about something that their minds can't quite get a handle on yet, it feels aligned. And that's more important than anything else, because we are vibrating beings, we're energy. And if something feels interesting or curious, or something feels resonant, that's more important than what the mind can understand. And if you focus on that feeling state, I'm going to keep listening to this because it feels good, or it
Yeah.
feels like I'm expanding, your mind will eventually catch up to
Catch
that.
up. May take a while. It took mine a while.
But it really doesn't matter if it doesn't, because what we're here for is to feel the oneness of feeling connected and resonant with each other. And that's the expansion of consciousness. So,
Oh my gosh. I don't know if you've had this, but I've had so many listeners, they'll call and say, every time I turn on your podcast, you're talking about exactly what I, needed to hear. I remember feeling that way with church. I remember myself feeling that way with other podcasts, and early on in my journey with Samantha Fay, specifically from enlightened empaths and psychic teachers. For whatever reason, I felt so aligned to her, and I've had her on my podcast a few times. But it is true, when there's a resonance,
mhm,
you will find that keep leaning into that resonance, because the answers begin to flow for the things that you seek.
right,
Hmm.
right. And actually, information and wisdom and knowledge is transmitted, expressed, and received far more easily through vibration than through the semantics of words or understanding of data packets of memory. So it's much more efficient to sit in resonance with an experience and actually expand into a new wisdom or perspective without really needing your mind to understand it at all.
Right. Oh, yeah. That's one of those things that you need to surrender.
Right. I mean, we could be sitting here,
Yeah.
singing the alphabet to each other. It really wouldn't matter, because the vibrational resonance is what is enlivening us.
Oh, I love that. Tell me about your services, like what you do for people. What you did for me was amazing, by the way. I mean,
Oh,
it was felt, it was lasting. It still is. It's something that I feel like I'm carrying with me always. So tell me a little bit about that, and can listeners experience like what I experienced?
so, well, as you know, I'm a channeler, so most of what I do is delivered that way. So I have a website, which is just my name, RebeccaDawson.com, and on there I do seminars and workshops, and we have a membership where you have group sessions with the masters every month, an hour-long webinar that's a teaching. I've got books. I'm on my fifth book now, but there's lots of free content on there for you to explore. And I like to make things as freely available as I possibly can.
Mhm.
So yeah, you can find out more about what we do there.
So when you say masters, how many are you working with?
So I used to experience them as 3 different streams of consciousness. And there's also Serapis and Kuthumi and others, depending on what the content is that we're delivering and what the topic is. We're doing a series at the moment on sound and how sound creates matter. And so for the purpose of that, it's the team of the masters together. They come through as a group consciousness because it's a very robust material.
Wow.
So it depends.
So were
Usually the
those,
same 3.
I was about to say, were those 3 men then standing at your bed in the white
I
room?
don't know the answer to that. And I've actually, would you believe, I've never actually stopped to think about it until just now when you asked that. Isn't that interesting? I'd always just put that as a completely separate experience. Most likely, yes.
Most likely. Yes.
How's that my brain never went there and put that together? Yeah.
But you know, in my dreams, many of the teachers, I've always kind of called them, have been hooded as well.
Oh, really? I've never heard anyone else talk about that. And you're saying that you experience angels, or you have more connection with angels.
Yeah.
I've only ever seen 2. And I used to do house clearings, when I was trying to pay my bills. And I used to go into people's homes and clear houses. And there was a young girl there who had autism, was on the autistic spectrum. And she couldn't sleep. And I had to go into her room and construct it differently vibrationally so that she could sleep. And I turned around, in the corner was this enormous light being. I'd never seen anything like it before. So tall, like taller than the ceiling. So wide. And oh my goodness, I started to tear up because, growing up Catholic, you hear about angels. And I know a lot of people have connections to angels, and I never experienced that. But my goodness, did I have a moment where I realized that this was an angel, and it was the most exquisite energy. And it was there for that child. And it was so beautiful. And it was just there. Amazing. I love the unfolding of it. I love that as we become more expanded, our understanding of things, it's like everything just unfolds.
Like a
bloom, like the flower behind me. Consciousness blooms, and we get to witness the blooming of it.
Yeah, it's a miracle in some way. It's magical. It's magical.
Yeah. And I think this is why it's so important not to attach to any beliefs, because it keeps unfolding, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, my beliefs, I will never, ever say again, I know it's this way and that's it.
Yeah, right. Because it'll change in the next minute.
Right. That's right. Well, thank you so much. You're such a beautiful soul.
Have a great day.
Sense of Soul.
Thanks for listening to Sense of Soul podcast, and thanks to our special guest. If you want more of Sense of Soul, check out my website at senseofsoulpodcast.com.
It's time to awaken.